war has ramped back up here over the past, actually, several weeks. And joining us now, special guest. Thank you very much for being with us today. And this is Chris Lowe from the University of Utah. Now, you are over Middle Eastern Studies, right?
Yes.
Just tell us about that, first of all, so people know your expertise.
Yes, so I direct the Middle East Center at the University of Utah, which has been around for really over 6 decades. We were one of the very first national resource centers in the United States, so very proud to continue that tradition here in Utah.
Yeah, and you can give us a deep inside look at what's going on over there. A lot of people don't really understand it, maybe even those in Washington who are kind of directing everything that's happening now. So, what has ramped back up since this skirmish first started?
You know, I would say that, you know, we had a ceasefire MOU, which dates back to April. And then in early July, we started to get more, you know, kinetic strikes again, threats against infrastructure. Earlier in July, we saw a lot of Iranian strikes, again, on sort of small Gulf states. This has been Iran's strategy, is rather than sort of attempting to go directly at Israel, which is a harder target, they've sort of spread the pain of this war out to all of the United States Gulf allies. I think a second...
That's kind of a strategy we see in situations like this, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, and I think a secondary component of this is Iran, because of the sort of all-in attempt by the United States to topple the regime. Iran really doesn't trust what the United States is offering. As a result of that, they're saying to themselves, okay, we've got a little bit of momentum towards rolling back all of these bases that the United States has all around the region, Jordan, Kuwait, you know, across the Arabian Peninsula. They really want to sort of degrade that capacity, and they've done quite a bit to do that.
Well, several times we've heard, okay, we have a deal. And then maybe there's a truce for a few days, and then it's right back to where we started. Why is that?
Well, none of the instruments, so you might think of something more stable being a treaty, right? So really the ink is dry. What we're getting are ceasefire MOUs, so memorandums of understandings. They're, you know, essentially deals to make another deal. Right, so a window, a sort of period, 60 days, or, you know, could be 10 days, to say, okay, we're going to cool off, we're going to try and be constructive and work with our partners. For most of this process, that has meant Pakistan as one of the sort of principal interlocutors. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the underlying differences are resolved. Iran feels that the United States is an aggressor in the region towards their interests, right? After this war has started, obviously Iran has shut down the Strait of Hormuz, so that's a very new status, and that's really, I think, untenable for the United States and the rest of the global community. The United States, of course, wants to ensure that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, but Iran doesn't trust the United States in that process. So we're quite far apart in terms of our goals and aims.
Well, the U.S. says that they've decimated most of Iran's military capabilities, but it doesn't look like that.
I think that that's quite optimistic. I mean, not to be too flippant, but it's happy talk. So I think there are a few things that we can say. So military strikes by the United States are, you know, by and large, what we're talking about is aerial strikes. So we're, you know, shooting missiles at, you know, missile launchers or naval capacity. But Iran's a bit of a unique adversary. Instead of things like big Navy destroyers or battleships, they have, you know, small inflatable boats, fast-moving boats, right? Lots of drones. So we're using THAAD missile interceptors in the Gulf that may cost $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million per. And then Iran is using $20,000 to $35,000 drones, which they're manufacturing at pace. So the mathematics of this don't really line up. We haven't been able to degrade their capacity to continue to make those drones and missiles. And I think the other part is there's an asymmetry here, right? For the United States, this is a far off, for the most part, I think for the American people, an out-of-mind kind of conflict. For the Iranians, this is existential. It's everything, right? So they have a lot more skin in the game than the United States.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You've already mentioned this. It's kind of expanding in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia just entered this conflict.
And I think that this part is a very dangerous passage. So Saudi Arabia has played this very cool. Saudi Arabia, I think, has no real interest of starting a hot war with Iran. They don't have the capacity to sort of prosecute that themselves. What's different about this is that Saudi Arabia has been quite disturbed by attacks that have emerged from Iraq, right? So if we think back some number of years after the American occupation of Iraq, Iran has had much greater influence, right? We think in the past Saddam Hussein was a Sunni regime. Now you have much more Shi'i influence, Iranian influence within Iraq itself, right? So the Iraqi government doesn't have full control of its territory. So there are militias that are Iranian-backed that are launching attacks into Gulf nations. In this case, attacks on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has felt like we have to do something credible to make this stop. But this risks a sort of escalation where you get Gulf partners in a sort of direct shooting match with the Iranians, which is dangerous. Dangerous for escalation. The other thing that we saw this week, too, were attacks into the Mediterranean, into Damietta in Egypt, right? So this is, again, yet another sort of puzzle piece. And we're also seeing the activation of Iranian allies in Yemen, the Houthis, who have promised to shut down the Bab al-Mandeb. So now we have Strait of Hormuz closed, Bab al-Mandeb on the southern end of the Red Sea, and now drone and missile strikes heading towards the northern end of the Red Sea, the Suez Canal.
There's so many forces coming into this right now. Would you say that this was kind of a breakdown in long-term planning once we kind of started this thing?
I think that's the real sort of breaking point is, in my best estimation, you had Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is selling Trump on the idea of a very quick sort of regime decapitation. So we're going to go in, we'll topple the regime, and all will be well. Well, they killed the supreme leader. That didn't topple the regime. And Iran, instead, I think has gotten younger, a little bit less strategically predictable, and they don't have anything to lose. As I said before, they've sort of seen the intentions of the United States and Israel, which were regime change. How can they really sort of cooperate? And so we're seeing a much more forceful sort of Iranian response throughout the region, and it's really it's choked things.
So in just a few seconds, what can the U.S. do now to maybe, I don't want to necessarily say save face, but maybe de-escalate things?
So I think that there are going to have to be real concessions. I think Iran at this point has a lot of leverage. I think you need a multinational coalition. This can't merely be the United States with relatively militarily, let's say, weak Gulf partners. You're going to really need to draw in other international partners. So one small bright spot here, Saudi Arabia has started to mobilize the idea of a sort of Red Sea defense. And they've got lots of partners in the Gulf and the Islamic world, but drawing in EU partners. So I think that's going to be an important part. We can't do the go-it-alone perspective, but I think there are going to be real, tough concessions that are going to have to be made to the Iranians. They're increasingly proving themselves to be a very capable middle, or maybe more than middle power in the world.
Well, Dr. Chris Lowe, thank you very much. You shed a lot of light on this, and people really need to understand what's going on here instead of just the daily news coverage. There's so much behind the scenes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Always good seeing you.
Thank you.